Nearly 11 kilometers down, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, everyone who'd ever been there told Victor Vescovo the exact same thing. There's nothing down here, just a flat, dead plain. That is not what was waiting for him. The floor had shape. Things were moving in his lights, and half buried in the silt, something that never should have made it there before he did. So he went back, 15 times, over 3 years. And what he found down there quietly rewrote what we thought we knew about the deepest place on Earth. The Mariana Trench is the deepest scar on Earth's surface, plunging almost 11,000 meters into the Pacific, out beyond the island of Guam. At its lowest point, a spot called the Challenger Deep, sunlight has never once reached in the planet's entire history. The water hovers just above freezing. The pressure exceeds 1,000 times what you feel standing on solid ground. Enough to crush an unprotected human body instantly. It's the full weight of the ocean stacked directly on top of you. Because that's literally what it is. For nearly all of human history, that place was simply unreachable. So when people pictured what sat at the bottom, they imagined an empty gray plain, a dead zone of cold mud, with nothing living on it. That assumption held for decades. Then one man went down to check for himself and kept going back until the whole picture came apart. His name is Victor Vescovo. Long before he ever touched the ocean floor, he'd already built a career most people only read about. A private equity investor, a former US Navy officer, and a mountaineer who'd summited the highest peak on all 7 continents, Everest included. He'd already completed the explorer's Grand Slam. All 7 summits, plus both poles. He had stood on top of the world. There was only one direction left. So he commissioned a submarine built for a place engineered to destroy machines. A titanium-hulled vessel called Limiting Factor, built by the Florida firm Triton. What made it different from every deep ocean submersible before it was simple but radical. Earlier subs were essentially built for a single trip to the very bottom and were finished afterward. Vescovo's was built to go back again and again. The first vehicle ever designed to treat the deepest point on the planet as somewhere you could actually keep visiting. In the spring of 2019, as part of an expedition to reach the deepest point of all 5 oceans, Vescovo piloted Limiting Factor into the Challenger Deep and touched down at nearly 11,000 meters. The deepest dive any human being had ever completed, edging past the record set almost 60 years earlier, in 1960. Before him, only 3 people in all of history had ever reached that spot. But here's the detail that says the most about him. Setting the record wasn't the point. 3 days after that historic first dive, he went straight back down. 4 dives to the absolute bottom of the ocean in just 10 days. He wasn't there to plant a flag. He was there to actually look. Remember what he'd been told to expect. Filmmaker James Cameron had piloted his own submersible to the Challenger Deep back in 2012 and described the bottom as flat, featureless, a lifeless moonscape. When Vescovo got down there himself, that description didn't hold up. For one thing, the seafloor wasn't flat at all. Sensor data from his sub, combined with robotic landers dropped alongside it, mapped out subtle ridges and rises across the bottom. Nothing like the smooth plane everyone had assumed was down there. And it wasn't lifeless either. As Vescovo swept his lights across the seafloor, small, pale, almost alien creatures kept appearing. His chief scientist, marine biologist Alan Jameson, later said the team believed they'd encountered 4 species entirely new to science. A shrimp-like crustacean called an amphipod, a spoon worm spotted around 7,000 meters on the way down, and, at roughly 8,000 meters, a pink snailfish drifting calmly through pressure that should crush almost anything. Sea cucumbers rested on the bottom, near colorful outcrops that may be chemical mineral deposits. Every one of those animals was surviving in permanent darkness, near freezing water, crushing pressure, and almost no food available. Conditions biologists once assumed were simply too extreme to support complex life at all. Clearly, they weren't. Cameron himself later publicly disputed Vescovo's claim to have reached a slightly deeper point, arguing the floor of the Challenger Deep is essentially flat, with nowhere lower left to find. That particular debate is still unresolved. But on the two bigger questions, whether the seafloor had real shape and whether it held life, the dive had already settled the matter. What actually put this expedition on front pages worldwide happened about 4 hours into that first dive. Half buried in the silt at the very bottom of the planet, Vescovo spotted something that didn't belong there. Reports described it as a plastic bag with what looked like candy wrappers nearby, resting at the single lowest point on Earth. Think about what that actually means. Vescovo was the first human being to ever lay eyes on that specific patch of seafloor. He reached the most remote, least accessible location on the entire planet, and our garbage had somehow beaten him there. It wasn't even a first. By that point, it was reportedly at least the third confirmed sighting of plastic waste at that depth. The mechanism isn't hard to picture. The United Nations has estimated roughly 100 million tons of plastic waste is already sitting in the world's oceans, and deep trenches function almost like drains, collecting whatever eventually sinks. The science that followed made it worse. Jameson's team collected amphipods, those small crustaceans living on the trench floor, and tested what was inside them. Across several deep-sea trenches, they found plastic particles in more than 70% of the amphipods examined, and in literally every single specimen collected from the Mariana Trench itself. Animals living at the very bottom of the planet. Some of them, species science hadn't even formally named yet, already had our plastic inside their bodies. You'd expect a discovery like that to be the end of the story. One record, one grim finding, and home. Instead, Vescovo kept going back. In 2020, he returned to the Challenger Deep with a larger team and a longer plan, this time bringing passengers down with him, one at a time, into a place that had swallowed only a handful of human visitors in all of history. One of them was Dr. Kathy Sullivan, former NASA astronaut and the first American woman to walk in space. When she reached the bottom in June 2020, she became the first woman ever to see the Challenger Deep, and the first person alive to have been both in orbit and at the lowest point on the planet. Back on the surface ship afterward, Sullivan and Vescovo connected by radio with astronauts aboard the International Space Station, over 400 kilometers overhead. The first time anyone had ever linked the deepest point humans can reach with people living in orbit above it. Another passenger that same year was Kelly Walsh, son of Don Walsh, the man who first touched this exact spot back in 1960 alongside Jacques Piccard. 60 years after his father's historic dive, the son descended to the same place. Vescovo didn't stop there either, returning again in 2021 and 2022. By the end of it, he had descended into the Challenger Deep roughly 15 times, more than any other human being who has ever lived. The first dive set the record. The going back was what actually mattered. Every trip mapped more of the seafloor, reached across all 3 separate basins that make up the Challenger Deep, and brought more scientists down to witness it firsthand. Altogether, the team charted something like 150,000 square kilometers of deep ocean floor. Vescovo later said his real hope was that these dives would open the door to permanently exploring the deepest ocean instead of treating it as a place humanity visits once in a lifetime and then quietly forgets about. The flat, dead plain we used to imagine at the bottom of the world was never actually there. What's really down there is ridged, cold, and quietly full of life we're only just beginning to name. And it's already tangled up with our own plastic waste. And almost everything we now know about it, we know because one man refused to visit the bottom of the ocean only once. There's an entire world down there in the dark that we've barely begun to explore. And some of what's been pulled from the deep since is even stranger than a plastic bag at the bottom of the sea. If deep ocean stories like this one grab you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what we cover next. And down in the comments, tell us, would you actually get in that sub and go all the way to the bottom? We read every single one. Until next time, stay curious about the deep.